Hi, I'm Trevor Hall, the founder of Comeback. Welcome to the Recovery Room, where we talk about sport, psychology, injury recovery, and a bit of everything. Good evening.
Hello, Trev.
My name is Trevor Hall. I'm sitting here with Annika Larson, ENCA journalist, incredibly famous and well-renowned
Very.
TV anchor, who I've known for a while and who has had a whole lot of questions about psychology, sports psychology, and the Comeback program as well. And we thought it would be a good idea, instead of chatting about it over a cup of coffee, to get you on the Recovery Room podcast and have a discussion about it here.
Thanks, Trev. Yeah, we've been discussing it for a long time. I think since when you first started thinking about it, and now it's actually come to fruition, which is fantastic. Congratulations. And
Thanks so much.
I've been doing some of the Comeback programs, so that's also been really exciting for me because I can see where it started from and just seeing how passionate you are about it. But what I want to do is introduce people listening and watching this to you, because you and your passion and what you bring to this program, and you will do in the seasons of the podcast, is so integral to it because of who you are and what you've done in your life. So for those of you who don't know Trevor Hall, he was a fantastic rugby player. Take me through that, Trev. Don't put it down. Just say, just how you were a professional athlete.
I was. It feels like a million years ago. But yeah, I played rugby professionally for the Lions, or the Cats actually, back in Super 12 rugby, the Lions, and then I had a stint for about 4.5 years at Biarritz Olympic in France. So I played professionally for close on 13 years.
And then what made you seg from becoming a professional athlete to psychology?
I was actually always interested in psychology. I remember when I was at school, we did a couple of career assessments that one does.
Yeah.
And psychologist was always at the top of the list. I think, if I remember, it was psychologist, or what to study at university. It was psychology. Second was actually fine art, funnily enough. And I can't remember what the third was, but I actually ended up doing a BCom instead, which was probably not the best thing I could have actually studied. And then went to Stellenbosch University for a year. Didn't really enjoy it. Started playing rugby again the year after that, and then that's when I got into the Lions under 21 rugby team, and then from there started my career. So I put the studies off and my actual interest in psychology off until after my career. But I was always interested in it. I remember I used to just have I don't know if it's a knack for it, or almost a want to try and understand people with whom I was playing. I used to really observe kind of team dynamics. I mean, I can call them these things now because I've got a vocabulary that I think has come from education around psychology. I didn't really understand what I was observing back then, but I was an observant person. I often used to hang out with the doctors and physiotherapists and biokineticists, and I'd ask them questions about, so-and-so has been injured, how's he doing? What's he kind of going through? Why is so-and-so's injury sort of worse than person B, and these sorts of things.
Okay.
And after I finished my career in rugby, I actually went to go see a psychologist myself because I was at a bit of a loose end. I didn't really know what to do with the rest of my life. And she was an educational psychologist. And in about the second or third session, I can't remember exactly, she actually said to me, "Trevor, have you thought about studying psychology?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's funny you say that. I actually have." And I decided to enroll in a Bachelor of Psych, and my second major was English Literature. And I started my journey.
I think for me, Trevor's really a gentle giant, and you kind of smash a lot of stereotypes, for me at least, in terms of being this hulking big rugby player oak that I would imagine rugby players to be, which now I know is not necessarily the case. And having this great art for listening and empathy. And I think you've touched on that by being interested in players' injuries and that kind of thing. But I mean, you know what it's like to be injured. You've been quite sort of, badly hurt yourself.
I had a lot of injuries, even from under 21 rugby, even at school. I had a couple of knee injuries that took me out of playing for a month or two, and a lot of ankle injuries, a lot of knee injuries, shoulders, back, etc. And obviously, going through these times where I actually just wanted to be on the field, and it was something that gets in the way of, or got in the way, if I talk about it personally, got in the way of things that I wanted to do in my career. Quite often I'd feel myself getting to a place where I'm really starting to play well. I've made the starting lineup, entrenched in the team, etc. And then out of nowhere, a knee ligament goes, or you roll your ankle.
We see it happening all the time, and it's
all the time, yeah. And that, I mean, obviously it wasn't pleasant to go through, but what I did observe in myself was that I became quite accustomed to what methods and techniques, etc., actually help the rehabilitation process. And it's something that I observed in other players as well, where some players injured players, I would say, some of them would kind of stand up to the challenge of being injured and use that injury time to their advantage. And some of them would really, really, really struggle. I was a type of player who I would try and be on the more positive side of things. I would sort of ask for information. I would spend time with the physios and doctors. I think I actually irritated them a little bit from time to time as well, because I was consistently asking them, when am I going to be right? When am I going to be ready? And if they said to me 6 weeks, I'd be like, okay, cool. That means 3. So I'm going to tell the coach I'll be ready in 2, and that sort of thing. But I would push, and I would push through those times.
For parents, friends, or even peers of people listening to this podcast who know an athlete or somebody who's really passionate about sport, tell me what goes through one's mind when you're on the field and you've been badly injured.
It varies. I mean, look, there's a lot of research into this, and normally, if I had to say what a general experience would be, is there's that first, obviously, physical pain that you would feel, and that alerts you to something's wrong in your body. A lot of the time, I mean, I'm sure you've seen even on TV, if somebody gets badly injured, that even try and stand up and kind of carry on, and the leg just gives way or something. So there's a kind of there's a state that they go into of I wouldn't call it denial, but disbelief that this has actually happened. And there's an immediate questioning of, okay, if I'm injured, how bad is this? Well, first of all, what have I done? How bad is this, and how long am I going to be out for? I'm talking very much from the professional perspective.
This is what's going through your mind.
Yeah. And even in amateur levels as well. The professional side of things, there's obviously money involved, there's the contracts involved and whatnot, so the ramifications of the injury can be a little bit more, although the actual psychology of it is probably very, very similar across both professional and amateur sport.
I kind of feel that I would get, even though I'm an optimistic person, I think I would get quite depressed without support. I mean, I don't know how you wouldn't if you were injured and you're sitting there on the sidelines week after week, watching everybody else play.
So I mean, after that first, that initial phase of the injury, it takes a little bit of time for the reality of actually what's happened to settle in.
Okay.
And that's what, through research, it's what we call the information processing stage of injury. And it's very similar to trauma, like, psychological injury as well. So
It's traumatic.
Oh, it's very traumatic.
Yeah.
I mean, it shatters your assumptions of what you thought you were going to be or what you were going to do. And you've got to kind of recalibrate yourself in the world. And, who am I now? I was thinking I was going to finish this game, whether win or lose, spend time with my friends and family and then carry on training the next week, etc. Now, all of a sudden, that's finished. So there has to be an immediate recalibration of, okay, well, where am I now? If my very immediate future isn't what I thought it would be, what's going to happen to my far off future as well? And there within lies the kind of trauma, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's why I think I want to talk to you about why comeback is so important. And I'm pretty amazed that it hasn't been thought of before, because to me it would be so integral to somebody's recovery as an athlete. So you're going to be doing these podcasts and the interplay will be with the program, which is Comeback. And let's get to that. What is Comeback and why have you come up with this? Because it's going to be life-changing for so many people.
So let me just get back to the question that you asked earlier about, it was more of a statement actually about, surely if you get injured, you get depressed.
Yeah,
so
that would be me at least.
I think, let me answer that first and then I'll get into exactly what comeback is and where it comes from. So that first phase of injury is going to be is what they call the information processing stage. So because there's still a little bit of disbelief and people don't really understand what's happened and they're trying to orientate themselves in the world again, they're looking for information. And that information is, how bad is it? How long am I going to be out for? What can I do to make this better? What resources do I have? And all of this stuff can happen very quickly. So you probably find, well, I know, research has said, that as soon as somebody's injured like that, all of this stuff can go through their mind, within a second or two.
Oh, okay. We're talking about fast. Okay.
Literally at that time of injury.
Okay.
And that kind of carries on over the first couple of weeks until there's a good enough diagnosis and prognosis. A prognosis being, how recoverable is this injury? Okay. In terms of the depression, etc., that people can go through, that varies. So depending on the person's personality, on how susceptible they are to things like depression, anxiety, stress, etc., that will vary. But normally what will happen is once the person has come to some sort of understanding of what happened in the injury, what the diagnosis is, what the prognosis is, there seems to be some sort of release of that energy, and they can quite often go into what they call the emotional reactive stage of injury recovery.
Well, there's a loss of routine too. So there's
loss
this
of
big
routine,
gap.
All of that stuff it sort of works its way through the stage, and the injured person or athletes, active person, exercise enthusiast, will go into a almost mourning of actually what has happened. And there the person can get, again, depending on personality and all that, can get sad, can get really irritable, can get very frustrated. If you think about it, you've got someone who has been at the peak of their fitness and conditioning, etc., and now they can't move around. They're often dependent on people to lift them around, or they can't even move. They have to be in bed with a brace on, leg up, etc. So they can't do anything, and that can drive them to frustration, a lot of frustration. They often can't see friends and family as much as they used to. So you get highly extroverted people who like to be around other people and whatnot, and so now they're isolated on their own. They can't move around. They can't do what they need to do. So all of this stuff can start causing a lot of emotional upheaval in that stage. And that stage of the injury recovery can take from 2 weeks to, I don't know, months, until that person is actually physically ready enough to go back into life, driving their car, a little bit more independent, etc. Then what happens is they go to the positive outlook stage of injury recovery. So as soon as people can start being a little bit more mobile, and they can see that they are getting better to a certain extent, very often they become a lot more self-motivated to go into that rehabilitation process and take charge of their lives again.
Talk to me about those who are injured that are supported and unsupported.
So research has shown, and this isn't just for injury, funnily enough, this is actually cuts across so many sort of social factors and psychological or social factors, is that people who experience social support tend to do better across many facets of life. Work, intimate relationships, sports, education, everything. So injury recovery it falls within these life facets, basically. So there's been studies done on injury recovery rates and how effective injury recovery is with groups of people, or cohorts or samples of people who self-express social support. So they've got good family systems that they're supported by, a good community that they're supported by, friends, etc., etc. And they've compared these people, this population, to people who haven't. And the results show that the people who are supported tend to heal probably about 30 to 40% more effectively than those people who are not supported.
So that's amazing to me, that the psychology and the physiology are so intertwined. Yeah. I didn't realize that. I didn't give that as much thought until we'd started talking about it.
Of course. I mean, it's there's a model called the biopsychosocial model. And what that is, it's a model that looks at how disease and pathology, which is the same kind of thing, develop, and also how wellness can be created. So we know that anything biological is going to have a psychological and a social component. Anything social that happens is going to have a biological and psychological components, and anything psychological is going to have a biological and sociological component. So if I get injured, there's a physical, biological issue that I have. That's going to have some sort of psychological effect on me. I'm going to feel upset, maybe angry, irritable, feel like a bit of a burden on my team, perhaps my family, etc.
Yeah.
Which is going to have a social consequence. I might get a bit ratty, perhaps with someone close to me. I might snap at someone. I might want to withdraw from people. I might want to isolate myself.
Yeah.
That's going to then have more of a psychological consequence, which is going to cause me perhaps to have more stress. The stress is then going to play out in more pain, and then the cycle repeats itself. So somewhere along the line in the injury and disease model, actually, there has to be a looking at all three of those components of a human being in order to get that what people call an holistic way of looking at things. But I mean it in the definitive term, holistic, yeah.
So what is happening at the moment to both professional and amateur athletes who are injured? Are they getting the support that they need, generally, in your experience?
Look, I mean, generally speaking, no. I think that there's a massive gap in psychology and sports psychology, sports actually in general, between performance and player wellness, if I want to lay speaking. And the reason why I say that is I think that we've become such a hyper-performance orientated society over the last 20 to 25 years.
Okay.
Everything is competitive. I mean, you just look at social media, you look at things are just competitive. Everyone's competing all the time. It's exhausting. It can really be exhausting. And I think sports, because of the amount of talent that just comes out of nowhere all the time. I mean, kids these days, South Africa, America, the UK, wherever it is, South America, there are just these massive pools of kids and teenagers and young adults who are so good at what they do. And once they're in a team or they make it through to some amateur or professional level, there are 1,000 of them just waiting to take their place if they sort of mess up. So there's this hyper-performance way of looking at things. And I think that although many psychologists, and I think sports psychologists, who might disagree with me with this, I'm sure there are some colleagues would, I think they get sucked into the performance side of psychology, which I think doubles down on the pressure that these players are under already. My idea around psychology, or my philosophy really, and coming from a background of being a professional sports person, is that the performance side of things will take care of itself if you look after and support the player as an individual and as a human being. And that's where the injury recovery side of psychology needs to be addressed. I think there are some people who look at it, but I don't think it's given enough attention.
So are professional teams, for instance, given psychological support when they get injured?
I can't speak for all teams. I think there might be some. I'm not sure exactly, but from my experience, no. I think most of the psychologists who work in professional teams, especially rugby teams, etc., in South Africa, I'm not sure about the States and those countries, but I know that most of the teams here, no. The psychology is very much aligned towards how do you perform? How do you perform better, more efficiently, more effectively?
So sorry, Trev. So you have, a nutritionist, you have a biokineticist, you have all of this, but the psychologist, which is really integral to not only performance but to recovery, is often missing from the mix.
Can be,
and
yeah.
That's what why I want to bring comeback into this, because it's, for me, it seems like such an obvious and cost-effective and convenient way, if you like, in this information technology age that we're in, to manage the situation.
So along those lines, we've had, again, I read journal articles on this stuff almost on the daily, and constantly reading for new stuff and new information that's coming out around sports injury and what we can do to make that injury recovery as effective as possible. Yeah. And one of the I nearly said disturbing. Is it the right word, disturbing? I suppose maybe it is disturbing for me. Fact is that sports injury is the #1 trigger for mental distress and mental illness in the sporting community worldwide, amateur and professional. Far down the rung in terms of percentage people who are triggered into some sort of mental distress are performance issues and then relationship issues. So it goes injury here, main trigger, and then right underneath it, far underneath it, is performance and relationship issues.
They're so enmeshed with identity, and that goes down to all the other parts of one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something, and this is why it's distressing to me to a certain extent, the fact that there's not more emphasis placed on supporting players, athletes at that injury level. There's not enough support. And some of the people working, I suppose there are some sports psychologists and coaches, etc., who do work well with these players, but there's so much more that you can do. And it's, in my opinion, it's very much around that social support. As I said earlier, those people who feel supported heal better. You don't have to worry about, if a player is a professional player, they've got the skills to play. That's the coaching side of things.
Right.
That they know how to play, they're mentally resilient already, they've got a whole lot of psychological skills that a lot of people don't have. That's taken them to that point. But a lot of the time, what happens is in the injury space is it brings out those deficits in the person. It brings out those things that they haven't developed, which is often the emotional side of being a human being, and relationship side of things. And that stuff comes out in the injury process.
Is there a stigma attached to psychology and wellness, mental wellness in the sporting arena?
I think less so. If you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said yes. I think less so. I think there's been a huge drive, which has really been cool over the last 10 years, to bring psychology into the mainstream. It's been mostly in America and in Europe, in the UK. I think South Africa, to a large degree, I think we lag behind. I think that a lot of the administrators in rugby teams, cricket teams, netball teams, all of our big sports here in South Africa, I think they mean well, but there's still quite a confusion between what the job of a psychologist actually is, as opposed to a coach or a life coach or a pastoral coach or a motivational speaker or something like that. I mean, some of the teams who I've worked with, that almost had to be explained. You know, the difference between psychotherapy and coming to talk to a team to motivate them, or injury rehabilitation processes through psychology and stuff like comeback and whatnot. I don't think there's enough education around it or knowledge around what a psychologist actually does.
So it's not the normal status quo. It's still something that's not developed enough in your mind in that sporting field.
I think we're open to it. I think we're at a stage now where we're open to it, but I think there needs to be more. I think there needs to be a stronger voice, and I think also coming from psychologists, especially the ones who want to work in the relationship with players and who want to sort of steer away from the performance side of things and allow the coaches and the people who know about performance to do their job in that way. In my opinion, and as I said, I mean, I think a lot of my colleagues might disagree with me with this, but I think that the role of the psychologist is to hold and support the human being that's playing the sport. I think that's the fundamental or foundational cornerstone of performance anyway. I mean, you can teach somebody as much as you like, you know, how to throw a rugby ball around, or how to, you know, go back to zero if they've made a mistake, or have a call in their mind to, you know, stay in process or something like that. You know, but if the foundation of the human being, if the person doesn't feel as though they are existing in the world and they have some sort of psychological drive towards finding meaning in their lives, not just as a professional or amateur sports person, but as an actual human being, you know, it's just a matter of time before the performance kind of peters out.
The key word and the key takeaway, I think, for me in all of this, Trevor, which I think you'll develop as the podcasts go on, is that athletes, sports people interested in sport, they are human beings. And I say that because when I watch them on TV, they're icons. They're being sold from one club to another as if they're objects. They are either failures or they're success stories. They're never nuanced humans in between to the general public.
No, look, I mean, I hear what you're saying. And, you know, in a way I agree. But at the same time, you know, you're talking about people who have such a high level of resilience and such a high level of performance embedded in them. You know, for somebody to get to a level where they're playing professional sport in these big teams and performing at these high levels also in individual sports, that person in a way is iconic. You know, that they're doing something incredibly difficult and they're doing it at the absolute best of the best. It's something that is laudable. You know, there's a reason why the general population, how we as people, we've always admired sports people. We've admired them for what they can do. We've admired them aesthetically. We've admired them being able to go through trials and tribulations and come out the end. I mean, that's really actually what sport represents.
I don't think we're forgiving enough of them, Trevor. I think that we expect them to succeed, and we don't. I think we as public, and maybe that's because I'm looking from the outside, we don't see them as succumbing to human frailty, put it that way. We don't see them as having the same kind of emotions that normal people would have. And that's why I wonder if we don't think enough about the psychology and how much psychological support they might need.
That I can agree with, yeah. And I think it's, and there I think is where the work can be done from a psychological perspective, or people working with them in especially the injury space, is to allow them to feel supported in that way as well. The public perception of athletes, I don't think is going to change much. They're athletes, they're being paid exorbitant amounts of monies to do what they do. They're the best at what they do. And that's awesome, and a lot of them, it's fun. It's a charmed life.
It's a privilege. Yeah.
It's a privilege. It's hard. I mean, when I was playing rugby professionally, I mean, I had a wonderful time. It was fun. I got to travel. I met amazing people, but there were times where it was very, very hard. There was a lot of sacrifice that goes into it, and I think that, obviously, me coming up with Comeback and also going into this sort of branch of psychology, which it's not my main area of practice. I mean, my practice is with, a general population who are struggling with life issues. That's really where the sort of meat of my practice is. But going into this side of things with sport came from an understanding that although, yes, these players and athletes are having a good time and they're seen as being these icons, etc., there is a massive gap in terms of developing other things that they could hold for later on in life when their careers come to an end.
And that's where Comeback comes in. When did you sit down and think to yourself, we need a program to support these players?
So I suppose when I finished my rugby career and I started studying psych, so in South Africa, and I'm not sure, I think it's the same around the world, studying psychology is very research laden. So you've got to learn basic statistics, you've got to learn how research is done, you've got to do your own research projects and whatnot. And my first, my master's research project was on sports, the lived experiences of injured Super Rugby players. And I did a research study on basically what injured Super Rugby players go through when they're injured. And from that, I started thinking about, okay, well, if we understand what these guys go through, we can at least then start formulating interventions to make the healing process a lot more effective and to support these players. But it obviously came off a lot of my own experiences.
Do you want to talk about what Comeback is in podcast 1, which we're doing now, or do you want to save that for podcast 2?
Let's save it for podcast 2.
Okay.
I think we can get really stuck into the bones of it.
Yeah, because it's really, I mean, I've done some of the program and it's amazing. And I think we can land on this, that this is not just for super athletes. This is for 16 years and up who are training on a daily basis, who have goals to become in the professional arena, or who are just incredibly sporty and define themselves and their dreams with sport.
Of course. I mean, just an exercise enthusiast, somebody who just likes fitness and is training and, who enjoys being outside, being in the gym, that type of thing, and who comes into conflict with an injury. The psychology of human beings is very similar across all these populations. So yes.
I like to sit down with you, Trevor, when we have our coffees, because I feel like I've learned something. So I feel like I've learned something today in recording this. And I think podcast 2 is going to be amazing because we'll actually get into the nuts and bolts of what the program does. And I'll be able to testify to some of that, how important it is. And I'm not even a professional athlete by any means.
You are a professional athlete.
So
I've seen you on the prom.
So having my little trots on the promenade. So
Okay, cool.
yeah, thanks for teaching me something.
Thank you for being here. Thanks, Annika.